You think you know what pride looks like? Wait until you hear what this man did to the one person who tried to save him. Richard Ames had it all: the house, the cars, the respect. But he pretended to lose everything just to test one man. What he discovered sleeping outside that gate broke him in a way money could never fix. Hey there, welcome back. Before this story begins, do us a favor. Like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop your country in the comments below. Are you watching from Canada, Johannesburg, maybe Jamaica or Houston? We'd love to know. Now listen, I'm going to tell you a story that's going to make your blood boil, and then it's going to make you cry. And by the end, you're going to look at every person you pass on the street a little differently. Trust me on that. It starts with a man named Derek Hollis. Derek was 54 years old. He was a tall man, 6'2", but he didn't carry his height the way tall men usually do. He hunched, like he was trying to make himself smaller, like he was apologizing for taking up space. He had broad shoulders that curved inward and hands that were always in his pockets. His hair was dark brown with streaks of gray at the temples, and he kept it cut short because he said long hair was for men who had time to worry about how they looked. Derek didn't have that kind of time. Derek had a company to run. He lived in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut that sat behind a black iron gate at the end of a long gravel driveway lined with maple trees. The house was brick. Red brick with white trim and black shutters. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. A study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that Derek had built himself over the course of 3 weekends when he first moved in. He was proud of those bookshelves. They were a little uneven on the left side, and the bottom shelf had a gap where the wood didn't quite meet the wall. But they were his. He had cut the wood. He had sanded it. He had stained it a dark walnut color that smelled like turpentine for 2 weeks after. He could have hired someone. He had the money. But Derek liked building things with his own hands. It reminded him of where he came from. And where Derek came from was nowhere close to Greenwich, Connecticut. Derek grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner in Newark, New Jersey. The apartment always smelled like chemicals and steam. His mother, Lorraine, worked the counter downstairs 6 days a week. She was a short woman with thick arms and a laugh that could fill a whole building. She wore the same green apron every day, the one with the pocket where she kept peppermints for the kids who came in with their parents. Derek's father left when Derek was 4, just packed a bag one Tuesday morning and walked out the front door. Lorraine never talked about him. Not once. When Derek asked, she would hand him a peppermint and say, "Some people aren't meant to stay, baby."
That doesn't mean you aren't meant to be loved.
Derek was a quiet boy. He didn't have many friends. He spent most of his time in the back room of the dry cleaner doing his homework on an overturned milk crate, while the pressing machines hissed and clanked behind him. He was good at math. Not just good, exceptional. His teachers noticed. His guidance counselor noticed. By the time Derek was 16, he had a scholarship offer to a prep school in Connecticut. Lorraine cried the day he left. She stood on the sidewalk outside the dry cleaner in her green apron and held his face in both hands and said, "You go out there and you build something, Derek Hollis, but don't you ever forget where your foundation is." Derek never forgot. He went to that prep school, then college, then business school. Then he started a small tech company out of a rented office above a pizza shop in Stamford. The company made software for small businesses, inventory tracking, payroll systems, simple tools that saved shop owners hours of work every week. Derek understood small business owners because he had grown up watching his mother run one. He knew what they needed because he had seen what they struggled with. The company grew, slowly at first, then faster. By the time Derek was 40, Hollis Tech Solutions was worth $60 million. By the time he was 44, it was worth $200 million. By the time he was 50, it was worth $400 million, and Derek was on the cover of business magazines with headlines that called him a self-made genius. But Derek didn't act like a man worth $400 million. He still drove a 10-year-old truck. He still wore the same brown leather jacket he had bought at a thrift store in his 20s. He still went to Newark every Sunday to visit his mother at the nursing home where she lived now. Lorraine was 81. She didn't always remember Derek's name anymore. Some days she called him by his father's name. Some days she didn't call him anything at all. But every time Derek walked in, she would reach into the pocket of her robe and pull out a peppermint and hold it out to him. She always had peppermints. The nurses made sure of that. Derek had a housekeeper named Wanda who came 3 times a week. Wanda was 60 years old with silver-streaked braids and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She had worked for Derek for 11 years. She knew where everything was. She knew that Derek kept a photo of Lorraine on his desk in the study, next to the uneven bookshelf, and that he polished the frame every Friday morning before work. She knew that Derek made his own breakfast every day, scrambled eggs and toast, and that he always burned the toast slightly because he got distracted reading the news on his phone. She knew that Derek was a good man, a quiet man, a man who tipped every delivery driver $20 and remembered the names of every janitor in his office building. But there was one thing about Derek that Wanda didn't understand, and that was his relationship with a man named Victor Ashford. Can you believe what I'm about to tell you? Because I almost didn't believe it myself. Victor Ashford was 48 years old. He lived 3 houses down from Derek on the same street in Greenwich. His house was twice the size of Derek's. White stone, columns in the front, a circular driveway with a fountain in the center that had a marble angel pouring water from a jug. Victor's gate was gold, not painted gold, actual gold plating. He made sure everyone who drove past knew that. Victor came from money, old money. His grandfather had built a real estate empire in the 1940s. His father had doubled it. Victor had inherited it all at 32 when his father died, and he had spent the next 16 years making sure everyone in Greenwich knew exactly how rich he was. He drove a different car every day of the week. He wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had a watch collection displayed in a glass case in his living room like a museum exhibit. 47 watches. He knew the value of each one down to the penny. Victor had a wife named Catherine. Catherine was thin and blonde and quiet in the way that women become quiet when they've learned that speaking up leads to arguments they can't win. She smiled at neighbors. She attended charity events. She wore expensive dresses and expensive shoes and looked from the outside like a woman who had everything. But Wanda once told Derek something she overheard at the grocery store. Catherine had been on the phone in the parking lot, and she was crying, and she said to whoever was on the other end, "He makes me feel like I'm furniture. Pretty enough to keep, but not worth talking to." Victor also had a son. His name was Oliver. Oliver was 12 years old. He was a small boy for his age, skinny, with sandy brown hair that fell in his eyes. Oliver was quiet, like his mother. He spent most of his time in his room reading books about space and building model rockets from kits he ordered online. He didn't have many friends at school. The other kids said his father was scary. Oliver never argued with that. When Victor spoke, Oliver looked at the floor. When Victor yelled, Oliver left the room. When Victor criticized, which was often, Oliver said, "Yes, sir," and went back to his rockets. Now here's what you need to understand about Victor Ashford. Victor didn't just have money. He had a need for people to know he had money. And more than that, he had a need for people to feel smaller than him. That was the thing that drove Victor. Not the money itself, the feeling of being above everyone else. And the person he most enjoyed looking down on was Derek Hollis. It made no sense if you looked at it from the outside. Derek was a wealthy man himself, a successful man, a respected man. But to Victor, Derek was a reminder of something Victor couldn't stand. Derek had built his money from nothing. Victor had inherited his. And somewhere deep in Victor's gut, in a place he would never admit existed, that difference ate at him like rust on iron. It started small. Comments at neighborhood gatherings. Victor would look at Derek's truck in the driveway and say, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Still driving that thing, Derek? You know they make new ones, right?" He would see Derek's brown leather jacket and say, "Is that vintage or just old?" He would mention Derek's mother. "How's the nursing home? Must be hard watching someone fade like that. Of course, you probably can't afford the better ones." Derek never responded. Not once. He would press his lips together and nod and walk away. That was Derek. He absorbed things. He didn't fight back because Lorraine had taught him that fighting with a fool makes two fools. But what happened next was something nobody saw coming. 10 years ago, at a neighborhood 4th of July party, Victor went too far. The party was at Victor's house, because of course it was. Catered, live music, a fireworks display that Victor had paid $30,000 for. Half the neighborhood was there. Derek came because Wanda told him it would look strange if he didn't. Derek was standing near the buffet table, holding a plate of food he wasn't eating, when Victor walked up to him with a glass of champagne and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Victor was already drunk. His cheeks were flushed and his voice was too loud. "Derek," Victor said, loud enough for the 15 people nearby to hear. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Derek looked at him. He said nothing. He waited.
"What's it like?"
Victor said, leaning in like he was sharing a secret, but speaking at full volume. "Knowing that no matter how much money you make, you'll always be the kid from above the dry cleaner. You can buy the house, you can buy the truck, but you can't buy the pedigree." He laughed. Nobody else laughed. Victor didn't notice. He kept going. "Your mother pressed other people's shirts for a living, Derek. That's your bloodline. That's your legacy. You can put a new coat of paint on a shack, but it's still a shack underneath." The yard went quiet. The music kept playing, but nobody was listening to it. Every person within earshot was looking at Derek, waiting. Some of them were horrified. Some of them just wanted to see what would happen. Derek's hand tightened on his plate. His jaw clenched so hard that a muscle jumped in his cheek. For a moment, just a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Something hot and sharp. Then it was gone.
He set the plate down on the table, gently, the way you set down something breakable.
He looked at Victor. "My mother pressed shirts so I could press forward," Derek said quietly. "What did your father do so you could stand here and embarrass yourself?" Then he turned and walked away. Through the yard, past the fountain, through the gold gate, down the street, into his house. He closed the door and didn't come out for 3 days. But Derek had no idea what was coming next. After that night, Victor made Derek's life a project. Not a side project, a main one. He went after Derek's reputation the way a man pulls weeds from a garden. Systematically, thoroughly, with his hands in the dirt. It started with whispers. Victor told other business owners in Greenwich that Hollis Tech was struggling. He told them at dinners and golf outings and fundraisers. He told them casually, the way you mentioned the weather. "Oh, have you heard about Derek? Terrible situation. The company is bleeding money. The software is outdated. I give it 2 years, maybe less." None of it was true, not a single word. But Victor knew people. He knew people in banks. He sat on the boards of 2 country clubs. He played poker every Thursday with 3 men who ran hedge funds. And whispers have a way of becoming headlines when the right people repeat them enough times. The damage came fast. Derek's 2 biggest clients, a grocery chain and a mid-sized hospital network, both called within the same week. Not angry calls, concerned calls. The kind of calls where people use careful words like, "We just want to make sure," and "We've been hearing things." One of them, the grocery chain, pulled their contract 2 weeks later. They said it was about strategic realignment, but Derek knew what it really was. It was about a lie that Victor Ashford told over a glass of champagne at a country club. Derek's stock dipped 3% in 1 week.
3% doesn't sound like much, until you remember that 3% of $400 million is $12 million in value.
Gone. Because of one man's mouth. But the financial damage wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what it did to Derek's team. His employees heard the rumors. The best software engineer on his team, a young woman named Priya who had been with the company for 5 years, came into Derek's office and closed the door and asked if they were going under. She had a baby at home. She needed to know if she should start looking for another job. Derek looked at her face, at the worry in her eyes, and he felt something twist inside him that he hadn't felt since he was a boy watching his father walk out the door. He felt helpless. Derek could have fought back. He had the money. He had the lawyers. He could have sued Victor for defamation and dragged the whole thing into the daylight. Wanda told him to. Diane told him to.
Marcus called him from California and said, "Derek, you need to hit this man where it hurts."
But Derek didn't. Because that's not who he was. Derek absorbed things. He fixed things quietly, the way his mother used to fix the pressing machine at the dry cleaner when it jammed. No yelling, no fuss, just patience and steady hands. He called his clients personally, every single one. He sat down with them face to face and showed them the numbers. He showed them the growth projections. He showed them the contracts that were coming in. He rebuilt what Victor had tried to tear down, brick by brick, call by call. And it cost him something. Not money. Something harder to replace. It cost him 6 months of sleep. 6 months of stomach acid and headaches and jaw pain from grinding his teeth at night.
6 months of sitting in his study at 2 in the morning, staring at Lorraine's photo next to the uneven bookshelf, rubbing his temples, wondering why some people needed to destroy others just to feel alive. Wanda noticed. Of course she did. She noticed that Derek stopped burning his toast because he stopped eating breakfast altogether. She noticed that the circles under his eyes got darker. She noticed that he started keeping antacid tablets in his jacket pocket the way his mother kept peppermints. One morning she found him asleep at his desk, his cheek pressed against a stack of client reports, and she draped a blanket over his shoulders and left a cup of coffee on the corner of the desk and didn't say a word. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person is let them know you see them without making them explain. Eventually, the rumors died. They always do. The stock recovered. The clients came back. Priya stayed. Derek's company grew even stronger, hitting $500 million in valuation by the end of that year. Victor never apologized. He never mentioned the rumors again. He never acknowledged what he had done. He just moved on to the next person he could look down on. The next person who made him feel small by existing. That's what people like Victor do. They break things and walk away without looking back. But Derek didn't walk away from it. Not really. It stayed inside him like a stone in his shoe. He could still feel it when he walked past Victor's house. He could still feel it when he saw that gold gate. He could still feel it on the 4th of July when fireworks went off, and he remembered standing near that buffet table holding a plate of food while a drunk man insulted his mother in front of their neighbors. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something deeper than anger, something closer to a question that kept him up at night for 10 years.
And the question was this: if Victor lost everything, if the money disappeared, if the name meant nothing, if he was standing at the bottom instead of the top looking up at the people he used to look down on, would he still treat them the same way? Or was the cruelty just a costume he wore because he could afford it? Was Victor Ashford cruel because he was rich? Or was he rich and also cruel? And that question, the one Derek carried for 10 years like a stone in his pocket right next to Lorraine's peppermint, is what led to everything that happened next. Stay with us, because what happens next will shock you. 3 months ago, Derek made a decision. He had been thinking about it for years, but 3 months ago he finally decided to do it. He was going to find out the answer to that question. He was going to test Victor Ashford. Not with lawyers, not with money, not with power. He was going to test him with the one thing Victor feared more than anything else in the world: weakness. Derek called his lawyer. He called his accountant. He called the 3 people in the world he trusted completely: Wanda, his chief operating officer named Diane, and his best friend from college named Marcus. He told them what he was going to do. Marcus said he was crazy. Diane said it was risky. Wanda looked at him for a long time and then said, "Your mother would understand. She'd think you were a fool, but she'd understand." Derek transferred temporary control of his company to Diane. He moved his personal accounts into a trust that Marcus would oversee. He told the neighborhood nothing. He stopped driving his truck. He stopped maintaining his house. He let the grass grow long. He let the mail pile up. He stopped going to the office. People started to talk. The whispers started again, but this time they were true in appearance even though they were false underneath. Derek Hollis was going broke. That's what everyone believed. They believed it because Derek wanted them to believe it. Within 6 weeks, the transformation was complete. Derek looked like a man who had lost everything. He wore old clothes. He didn't shave. He walked the streets of Greenwich with his shoulders hunched even more than usual. He sat on park benches. He stood outside shops he used to walk into without thinking twice. And then, one cold evening in November,
He did the thing that would change everything. He walked to Victor Ashford's house. He stood outside that gold gate, and he sat down on the sidewalk. And just when Derek thought he knew what would happen, it didn't. The first night, nobody noticed. Derek sat on the cold concrete with a thin blanket and a backpack filled with supplies Marcus had packed for him. A water bottle, 2 granola bars, a notebook, a pen, the small recording device. The November air was sharp. It smelled like dead leaves and chimney smoke from somewhere down the street. Derek pulled the blanket around his shoulders and leaned against the stone wall next to the gate. The gold gate glowed under the porch light. It hummed faintly when the wind blew through it. Inside the house, the lights were on. Derek could see the chandelier in the front hallway through the window above the door. He could see the shadow of someone moving in the upstairs window. He didn't know if it was Victor or Catherine or Oliver. He watched the shadow move back and forth. Then the light went off. The house went dark except for the porch light and the soft glow of a nightlight in what Derek guessed was Oliver's room. Derek pulled the blanket tighter. The concrete was harder than he expected, colder. It seeped through the blanket and into his bones. He thought about his mother's apartment above the dry cleaner, about the radiator that clanked all night, about the smell of chemicals and steam, about Lorraine standing at the pressing machine in her green apron, pushing the handle down, the hiss of steam rising, the shirts coming out flat and clean. He thought about peppermints. He thought about the stone in his shoe that had been there for 10 years. He was about to find out what it was made of. The second night, Victor noticed. Derek saw the curtain in the front room pull back. A face appeared in the gap between the fabric and the glass. Victor's face. Sharp, angular. That permanent expression that looked like he had just smelled something unpleasant. He stared at Derek for a long time, maybe 2 minutes. Then the curtain dropped. Nothing happened. No door opened. No voice called out. Just the curtain falling back into place like a mouth closing. The third night, Victor came outside. He walked down the driveway slowly, deliberately, in a cashmere robe the color of charcoal and leather slippers that made no sound on the pavement. He stopped on his side of the gate and wrapped his hands around the gold bars. He looked down at Derek the way a man looks at a stain on an expensive rug. Something to be dealt with. Something beneath attention but impossible to ignore. "What are you doing here, Derek?" Victor said. His voice was flat, not concerned, not curious. Flat. The way you ask a question when you already know the answer and just want to hear the other person say it. Derek looked up at him. He made his voice small, tired, broken. "I don't have anywhere else to go, Victor." Victor stared at him. Something moved behind his eyes. It wasn't sympathy, it was something else. Something that looked a lot like satisfaction. The same look a man gets when a prediction he made comes true. "I heard the company went under," Victor said. He said it slowly, tasting each word. "I heard you lost the house, the truck, everything." "I lost everything," Derek said. That was the script. That was the line. And it worked exactly the way Derek knew it would. Victor nodded. He looked at Derek sitting on the cold sidewalk with a thin blanket and dirty clothes and 2 days of stubble, and he didn't offer a glass of water. He didn't offer a blanket. He didn't offer a phone to call someone. He didn't offer the guest room or the couch or even the heated garage. He looked at Derek Hollis, a man he had known for 12 years, a neighbor, a man who had never once been unkind to him, who had never once raised his voice or returned an insult or fought back in any way. And Victor said something that made Derek's blood turn cold. "Well," Victor said, adjusting the belt on his cashmere robe with a small tug, "I guess some people just aren't built for success. It's in the breeding, Derek. I told you that years ago at the party. The dry cleaner's kid." He shook his head slowly, performing sadness the way an actor performs it. Convincing if you didn't look too closely. But his eyes were smiling. His eyes were absolutely smiling. "You had a good run. Better than anyone expected, honestly. But this is where you were always going to end up. This is where the story always ends for people like you." Then he turned around. He walked back up his driveway. His slippers made no sound. His robe swayed behind him. He opened his front door, stepped inside, and closed it. The lock clicked. The porch light stayed on.
Derek sat on the sidewalk and wrote every word down in his notebook. His hand was steady. His heart was not. Now listen, I want you to sit with that for a moment. Can you believe that? Seriously, can you? This man looked at someone he had known for over a decade, someone who lived 3 houses away, someone sitting on concrete in the cold November air with nothing but a thin blanket. And his first response wasn't concern. It wasn't compassion. It wasn't even basic human decency. It was gloating. He looked at that man and thought, finally. What kind of person does that?
What kind of person sees suffering and feels satisfied? But the real shock was still coming. The test continued. Derek slept outside that gate for 2 weeks. 14 nights on concrete. Some nights it rained. Some nights the temperature dropped below freezing, and Derek could see his own breath in the air, thick and white like smoke. He kept his journal. He wrote down everything. Every interaction, every word, every silence. On night 4, Catherine came out. She waited until Victor was in the shower. Derek could hear the water running upstairs through the open bathroom window. Catherine came down the driveway quickly, almost running, in a quilted jacket and house slippers. She carried a brown paper bag with a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water and a small bag of chips. She pushed the bag through the gap beside the gate and set it down next to Derek without meeting his eyes. Derek looked up at her. She had tears running down her face. Her hands were shaking. She whispered, "I'm sorry. He won't let me do more than this. I asked him to let you stay in the guest room. He said no. I asked if I could bring you a proper blanket. He said if I did, I could join you out here." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry, Derek." Then she turned and hurried back up the driveway before the shower turned off. Derek wrote that down in his notebook. He circled it twice. He ate the sandwich slowly. It was the best turkey sandwich he had ever tasted. Not because of the bread or the turkey, because of what it cost her to bring it. On night 5, Derek heard Victor and Catherine arguing through the closed windows. Victor's voice was loud enough to penetrate the glass. He couldn't make out every word, but he caught enough. "My house. My rules. Don't embarrass me." Catherine's voice was too quiet to hear. On night 6, Victor called the police. Derek heard him on the phone from inside the house. His voice was calm and measured, the voice of a man who was used to being listened to. "Yes, officer. There's a vagrant outside my property. He's been here for days. I feel unsafe." 2 officers came 20 minutes later. They were polite, professional. They asked Derek to move along. Derek told them he was on the public sidewalk, not private property. The officers looked at each other. They looked uncomfortable. One of them, the younger one, recognized Derek. He leaned down and said quietly, "Mr. Hollis? Is that really you?" Derek said yes. The officer offered to drive him to a shelter. Derek said, "No, thank you." They left. Victor watched from the window. On night 7, Victor came outside again. This time he brought reinforcements. 2 of his friends, business associates, men in cashmere overcoats who smelled like cologne and old money. They stood behind the gate like spectators at a show. Victor pointed at Derek and said, "See? This is what happens. This is what happens when people reach above their station. The market corrects itself. It always does." The men laughed, short, polite country club laughs, the kind of laughter that comes from obligation, not amusement. Derek sat on the sidewalk and looked at the ground and wrote it all down in his head because his notebook was in his backpack and he didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing him do anything but sit there. On night 8, Catherine left the sandwich bag again. This time there was a note inside, written in pencil on a paper napkin. "Thank you for showing Oliver that kindness exists. Please don't give up on him." Derek folded the napkin and put it in his jacket pocket. He kept it there for weeks. On night 9, something happened that Derek didn't expect, something that broke the whole test wide open. Oliver came out. The 12-year-old boy opened the front door at 7 in the morning, before anyone else in the house was awake. Derek heard the door click and looked up from his blanket. Oliver stood on the porch in his pajamas, blue flannel pajamas with little planets on them, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. He wore slippers shaped like rockets. He stood there for a moment, looking down the driveway at Derek, and then he walked forward, slowly, carefully,
like he was approaching something fragile. He carried a plate in one hand and a cup in the other. The plate had 2 slices of toast with butter. The cup was full of hot chocolate. Derek could see the steam rising from it in the cold morning air like a tiny signal fire. Oliver walked all the way down the driveway, found the gap on the left side of the gate where it met the stone wall, and squeezed through sideways, careful not to spill. He walked over and sat down on the cold sidewalk beside Derek. He set the plate and the cup between them. The toast was slightly burned on one side. Oliver noticed Derek looking at it. "Sorry about the toast," Oliver said.
"I'm still learning the toaster." "It's perfect," Derek said. And he meant it more than Oliver would ever know. "I'm Oliver," the boy said. Like Derek didn't know. Like they were meeting for the first time. There was something formal and rehearsed about the introduction, like he had practiced it in the mirror. "I know who you are," Derek said. Oliver nodded. He picked up one of the toast slices and tore off a corner and chewed it slowly. Then he said, "My dad says you used to be rich." "I was." "He says you lost everything because you weren't smart enough to keep it." Derek looked at the boy. Those quiet brown eyes, that sandy hair falling across his forehead, the planet pajamas, the rocket slippers. This was a child who built model rockets and read books about space and dreamed about things bigger than gold gates and cashmere robes. And yet here he was, sitting on a cold sidewalk at 7 in the morning with burned toast and hot chocolate for a man his father had mocked. "What do you think?" Derek asked. Oliver was quiet for a while. He picked at the crust of the toast. He looked at the sky, which was turning from gray to pale blue. Then he said, with the kind of clarity that only children have, "I think my dad says a lot of things that aren't true. I think he says mean things because he's scared. I think he's scared that if he stops talking, people will look at him and see that he's empty inside, like a house with all the lights on but nobody home." Derek stared at this 12-year-old boy, this child who had just described his own father with more honesty, clarity, and compassion than any adult on that street had managed in a decade. He wasn't angry at his father. He wasn't hateful. He was observant. He saw his father clearly, with understanding and a kind of quiet sorrow that was far too heavy for a 12-year-old to carry. "You're a smart kid, Oliver," Derek said. His voice was thick. "I know," Oliver said. No arrogance, just fact. The same way he would say the sky is blue. "I'm going to build rockets when I grow up. Real ones, not the models in my room. Real ones that go to space. I'm going to work at NASA or maybe start my own company. Something that actually does something. Something that matters." He paused. He looked at Derek carefully. "Do you think that's stupid?" "I think that's the best thing I've heard all week," Derek said. "Maybe the best thing I've heard all year." Oliver smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. It started at the corners of his mouth and worked its way up to his eyes, and for a moment, in that early morning light, on that cold sidewalk, everything else fell away. He sat with Derek for 20 minutes. He told him about his rocket models, about the Estes Alpha 3 he was building, about the book he was reading on the history of NASA's Gemini program, about how he wanted to name his first real rocket Rosemary, after his grandmother, Victor's mother, who had died when Oliver was 6, and who had been the only person in the entire Ashford family who ever told Oliver that he was special, just the way he was. She used to take him to the park and push him on the swings and tell him stories about the stars. She called him her little astronaut. Then Victor's voice boomed from the front door like a cannon. "Oliver, get inside, now!" Oliver flinched. His whole body jerked. His shoulders went up and his hands clenched and then slowly released. It was a reflex. The reflex of a child who had learned to brace himself for impact every time his father raised his voice. Derek saw it, and something inside him hardened. Not against Oliver. For him. Oliver stood up quickly. He brushed off his pajama pants. He looked at Derek with those quiet brown eyes and said, "I'll bring you breakfast again tomorrow." "You don't have to do that," Derek said. "I know," Oliver said, "but I want to. My grandmother would have wanted me to. She always said that the way you treat people when nobody's watching is the only thing about you that's real." He squeezed back through the gate and walked up the driveway. He didn't run. He walked. Steady. Straight. His rocket slippers scuffing on the pavement.
He went through the front door and it closed behind him. Derek sat on the sidewalk with a plate of burned toast and a cup of hot chocolate that was still warm, and he pressed his palms against his eyes and cried. Not because of what Victor had done to him, not because of the cold or the concrete. He cried because a 12-year-old boy had more kindness, more courage, and more goodness in his small body than his father had accumulated in 48 years of living. And he cried because he knew that if he didn't do something, that goodness would be slowly crushed out of Oliver, the way a heavy book flattens a flower pressed between its pages.
What Derek was about to do next would change everything. On day 14, Derek ended the test. He had seen enough. He had pages and pages of notes. He had recordings from a small device Marcus had given him. He had everything he needed. But the test hadn't just answered his question about Victor. It had shown him something bigger. It had shown him Catherine, trapped and kind. It had shown him Oliver, brave and good. And it had shown him that sometimes the people who live in the biggest houses carry the smallest hearts. Derek went home. He shaved, he showered, he put on a clean shirt. He called Diane and told her to restore everything. He called Marcus and said, "It's done." Then he sat down at his desk in his study, next to the uneven bookshelf and Lorraine's photo, and he made a plan. But he didn't make the plan most people would expect. Derek didn't go after Victor. He didn't sue him. He didn't expose him. He didn't call the newspapers. He didn't do any of the things that the anger inside him wanted to do. Because Lorraine had taught him something that stuck to his bones. She used to say, "When someone shows you who they are, don't try to change them. Just make sure their cruelty can't reach the people who deserve better." And the people who deserved better were Catherine and Oliver. Derek hired a lawyer. Not for himself, for Catherine. He found the best family attorney in Connecticut. He paid the retainer. He had the lawyer contact Catherine discreetly. The message was simple. If you ever want to leave, you don't have to worry about money. Everything is covered. Catherine called Derek 3 days later. She was crying so hard he could barely understand her. She said no one had ever offered to help her. She said she had been trying to leave for 6 years, but Victor controlled every dollar. She said she was scared. Derek told her she didn't have to be scared anymore. It took 2 months. 2 months of paperwork and quiet meetings and lawyers going back and forth. Catherine filed for divorce. Victor fought it, of course. He fought it with everything he had. He hired 3 lawyers. He threatened. He screamed. He told Catherine she would get nothing. He told Oliver that if his mother left, it was her fault, not his. But Victor didn't know that Derek was behind it. He didn't know that Derek was funding the whole thing. He didn't know that the lawyer sitting across from him in the conference room had been hired by the man he had looked down on from behind a gold gate. The divorce went through. Catherine got the house. The judge looked at the evidence of how Victor had treated his family, the financial control, the cruelty, the isolation, and awarded Catherine full custody of Oliver and 60% of the assets. Victor was ordered to leave the property within 30 days. And this is the part that brings us full circle. On the day Victor moved out, he loaded his things into a rental truck because his luxury cars were part of the settlement. It was a gray Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide between clouds and sun. Victor carried boxes down the driveway one at a time. No movers, no friends helping. Just Victor, alone, in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, carrying the pieces of a life that was falling apart. He stopped in the circular driveway, next to the fountain with the marble angel, and he set down the box he was carrying. He looked around at the house that wasn't his anymore. The columns, the white stone, the windows where Catherine's new curtains already hung, the gold gate that would probably be replaced within the month. All of it. Gone. Not taken. Lost. Because there is a difference. Derek was standing on the sidewalk. The same sidewalk where he had slept for 14 nights. He had walked over that morning because he needed to see this. Not to gloat, not to celebrate. He needed to see it. Because 10 years of carrying that stone in his shoe had led to this moment, and he needed to know what it felt like to set it down. He watched Victor come through the gate with a box under his arm. Their eyes met. The distance between them was maybe 8 feet.
8 feet and 10 years and 100 cruelties. Victor's face went white, then red. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words that wouldn't come out. He looked at Derek, clean-shaven, calm, rested, wearing that same old brown leather jacket, standing on 2 feet with his shoulders straight for the first time in years. Not hunching, not apologizing for taking up space, just standing there, solid, real. "You," Victor said. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "You did this. You were never broke. It was all a game." "No, Victor," Derek said. His voice was quiet but steady. The voice of a man who had spent 14 nights on concrete, thinking about exactly this moment and exactly these words.
"I didn't do this. You did this. Every single bit of it. Every insult, every lie, every time you made your wife feel like furniture, every time you made your son flinch. You built this, Victor, brick by brick. I just made sure the people you hurt had a way out." Victor's lips trembled. The box shook in his arms. He opened his mouth to say something cutting, something cruel, something that would make him feel big again, the way a cornered animal makes itself look larger than it is. But nothing came out. The words that had always been there, the ready-made insults, the casual cruelties, the clever put-downs, they were gone. Empty. Because for the first time in his 48 years, Victor Ashford was standing on the outside of his own gate, and there was no one left beneath him, no one left to look down on, no one left to make feel small so he could feel tall. Derek didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He didn't list Victor's sins or deliver a speech. He looked at this man who had humiliated him at a 4th of July party in front of their neighbors, who had spread lies that cost him $12 million and 6 months of sleep, who had called the police on him, who had brought friends to laugh at him through a gold gate, who had made his own wife cry in a grocery store parking lot, who had made his own son afraid of the sound of his voice. Derek looked at all of that, and he said one thing. "I hope you learn what my mother taught me a long time ago, that a person's worth isn't in the house they live in or the gate they hide behind. It's in how they treat the people who can do nothing for them." Then Derek turned and walked down the street toward his own house. His boots crunched on the gravel. His jacket creaked in the cold. He didn't look back. Victor stood there for a long time, holding that box, staring at the gate, at the angel fountain, at the house. He didn't move for nearly 5 minutes. The rental truck idled in the driveway. A neighbor walked by with a dog and looked away quickly. And then, slowly, something happened that nobody on that street had ever seen before. Victor Ashford set the box down on the curb. He sat down next to it, and he cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a man protecting his dignity. Real tears. The kind that shake your shoulders and make sounds you can't take back. Now, I don't know if those tears were real. I don't know if Victor Ashford learned anything that day. Some people change. Some people just change addresses. But that's not the part of this story that matters most. The part that matters is what happened inside that house after Victor left. Catherine redecorated. She took down the watch display case first. She put the 47 watches in a box and sold them at auction. She didn't keep a single one. She used the money to renovate Oliver's room. She painted it blue, his favorite color. She built him a proper desk near the window where the light came in strong in the morning. She filled the bookshelves with the books he actually wanted to read. Astrophysics, rocket propulsion, the history of NASA, a biography of Mae Jemison. She bought him a telescope, the one he had wanted for 2 years, that Victor had called a waste of money and a distraction from things that actually matter. The first night in his new room, Oliver stayed up past midnight looking at the stars through that telescope. Catherine came to check on him and found him sitting cross-legged on his bed with a notebook, drawing a diagram of Saturn's rings. She leaned against the doorframe and watched him for a while. He didn't notice her. He was too focused, too happy. She pressed her hand against her chest and thought about all the years she had spent being quiet. All the dinners where she sat at one end of a long table and said nothing while Victor talked about himself. All the nights she lay awake in the dark, wondering if this was what life was supposed to feel like. Hollow. Like living inside a beautiful frame with no picture in it. Not anymore. The house felt different now. The rooms felt warmer, even though the thermostat was set to the same temperature. The hallways felt shorter. The ceilings felt lower in a good way, like the house had exhaled and settled into itself. Catherine started cooking again. She hadn't cooked in years because Victor insisted on a private chef. But Catherine had grown up cooking with her grandmother in a farmhouse kitchen in Vermont. She made pot roast and apple pie and cornbread that filled the house with a smell so warm it felt like a hug. Oliver started eating at the kitchen counter instead of the dining room table. He said the dining room felt too big for two people. Catherine agreed. She sold the dining room table and bought a smaller one. Round. No head of the table. No hierarchy. Just two people sitting across from each other, talking about rockets and school and what to have for dessert. Derek became a regular visitor. He came on Saturday mornings, not because of Catherine, though they did become good friends over time. Two people who understood what it felt like to be made small by someone who was supposed to be trustworthy. They talked about their lives, about the things they had endured, about the things they had learned. But mostly, Derek came for Oliver. He mentored the boy. He drove him to science fairs on weekends. He sat in the audience at school assemblies when Oliver presented a project on satellite orbits and clapped louder than anyone else in the room. He helped Oliver apply to a summer engineering program at MIT that accepted only 40 students from across the country. When the acceptance letter came, Oliver called Derek before he called anyone else. Derek was in his truck on the way to visit Lorraine at the nursing home. He pulled over to the side of the road and listened to Oliver read the letter aloud, his voice cracking with excitement. And Derek sat there with the phone pressed to his ear and tears running down his face and a peppermint dissolving on his tongue. He helped Oliver build a real rocket, not a model, a working rocket, 4 feet tall, with a motor and a parachute recovery system. They built it in Derek's garage over the course of 3 months. They made mistakes. The first nose cone cracked. The second engine mount was crooked. Oliver wanted to start over. Derek told him a story about the bookshelves in his study. He told Oliver that the best things in life don't have to be perfect. They just have to be built with care. They launched the rocket on a Saturday morning in April at a field outside town. Catherine came. Wanda came. Marcus flew in from California for the weekend. The rocket went up 600 feet and came down exactly the way it was supposed to, the parachute opening like a flower, the whole thing drifting down through the clear sky and landing in the grass 40 yards away. Oliver ran to it with his arms pumping. He picked it up and held it over his head and shouted, "It worked!" Derek stood in the field with his hands in the pockets of his brown leather jacket, watching this boy who had once flinched at the sound of his own father's voice, now shouting with joy at the sky. And he thought about Lorraine, about the dry cleaner, about peppermints and pressing machines, and a mother who told her son to go build something. On the drive home from a regional science competition where Oliver took second place, Oliver was quiet in the passenger seat, holding his ribbon. He looked out the window at the trees going past for a long time. Then he said something that made Derek pull the truck to the side of the road. "Mr. Derek," Oliver said, still looking out the window. "When you were sitting outside our gate, I was scared for you. But I was also scared for me. Because I thought, if a man like you can end up with nothing, then nothing is safe. Then everything can be taken away. But now I understand something." He turned and looked at Derek. "You didn't lose anything. You just showed us what was already missing." Derek gripped the steering wheel with both hands. He stared straight ahead at the road, the trees, the sky. He couldn't speak for a full minute. His throat had closed. His chest felt tight in the way that only real truth can make your chest feel tight. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a peppermint. Lorraine's peppermints. He kept one in his pocket every single day. Even on days when the world was loud and nothing made sense, he had that peppermint. He held it out to Oliver. "My mom used to give me these when the world got too loud," Derek said. His voice was rough. "They don't fix anything, but they remind you that someone cares." Oliver took the peppermint. He unwrapped it slowly, carefully, like it was something valuable. He put it in his mouth and let it sit on his tongue. He smiled. "It's good," he said. "Yeah," Derek said. "It is." They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. The windows were down. The air smelled like cut grass and autumn leaves, and that particular clean scent that comes after a light rain. Oliver held his second-place ribbon in one hand and the peppermint wrapper in the other. He folded the wrapper into a tiny, perfect square and put it in his pocket. He kept that wrapper for years. He kept it in a small wooden box on his desk next to his rocket models and his NASA books and a framed photo of his grandmother. He never told anyone why it mattered, but he knew, and Derek knew. And sometimes, that's all that needs to happen. Two people understanding something together without having to explain it. Derek went back to running his company. He went back to his routines, scrambled eggs and burned toast, the brown leather jacket, the 10-year-old truck, Sundays at the nursing home. The last time he visited before this story ends, Lorraine was sitting in her wheelchair by the window in a patch of warm sunlight. She was wearing a blue cardigan that the nurses had put on her that morning. She didn't recognize him. She hadn't recognized him in months. Her eyes looked at him the way you look at a stranger in an elevator, polite but distant, empty of memory. But when Derek sat down next to her and took her hand, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan with her other hand. Slowly, her fingers fumbling, and she pulled out a peppermint. She held it out to him the way she had held out peppermints her entire life. To the kids at the dry cleaner, to Derek when he was scared, to a world that she believed deserved sweetness, even when it gave her none. Derek took it. He unwrapped it. He put it in his mouth, and he held his mother's hand and sat with her by the window and watched the light come through the glass. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. They just sat there together, a mother and her son. The peppermint dissolving, the light shifting, the silence full of everything that words could never carry. Some people build empires out of money. Some people build empires out of cruelty. But the empires that last, the ones that really last, are built out of peppermints and lullabies and toast brought through a gate by a 12-year-old boy in his pajamas who just wanted to do the right thing. Derek Hollis never fixed those uneven bookshelves. He could have. He had the money, the tools, the time. But he left them exactly the way they were. A little crooked on the left side, a gap at the bottom where the wood didn't meet the wall. Because they reminded him that the best things in life are the things you build yourself. Imperfect, honest, and made with your own two hands. I hope this story stays with you for a while. Please like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what you would have done differently. We love reading your thoughts. Until next time.